Thank you all for joining on this, well, mixed evening over here. I'm based in Ireland, so it's quite sunny. But thank you all for tuning in. I'm new to this platform, so apologies if there's any technical mishaps. Obviously, I can't see or hear any of you, so it's very different than what I'm traditionally used to. So hopefully everything goes according to plan. So I'm Una, as Aaron mentioned. I run an organisation called Blossom for Life, based here in Ireland, down the south, and where we work with students on an ongoing basis with dyslexia and other learning differences. Today's topic, as Aaron mentioned and gave a good introduction to, is how to help dyslexics. So we'll do a little bit of whistle-stop tour and we'll integrate some content, so some top tips and suggestions for parents, teachers, a little bit of an overview as well from a student basis, and then we'll intertwine some of the modules and some of the content that we'll focus on in the course if people are interested in looking at the course in further detail. A little bit about our background. So this is a link actually to a little bit more of what we do, a little bit more of an engaging, let's say, video content and video suggestions. Anyway, you can find this anyway on our YouTube platform at Blossom for Life. If people want to have a condensed version in a minute or two of our bits of background and kind of, summarized very briefly. A little bit of an overview. So I'm highly dyslexic. I also have dysgraphia and dyscalculia. Many years ago, I decided to move more into the space on diversity inclusion and helping other students and trying to prevent them from having maybe similar struggles that I experienced in an education setting. Since then, thankfully, we've worked with many organisations internationally and nationally here in Ireland. We do an awful lot of work with universities and with school-based students. So it's all individualistic based, and we work with a student on a direct one-to-one platform. A little bit of an overview. We take all age groups, so we work with very young students, kind of 6, 4 and 5 as well, really in recent months, all the way up to their 60s and 70s. Some of our students are borderline and into retirement and want, some just practical tips of how to read things easily, how to text, how to do bits and pieces with phonics and words and spellings, all of some of those topics that we'll address and look at today. Our mission, and I suppose where I come at it from a dyslexic standpoint, is to have a combination between an education stance but also a well-being stance. So I have a nutritionist background, and it's very, very important from my understanding of working with students and also from my experience to contain as much of a wellness approach as possible, so that the student is not only well in an education setting but as well, obviously, as well from a health basis. So we'll look a little bit at that throughout the session and see how we can integrate two of those separate strands into one piece. Obviously, we do form of assessments, we work with organisations, and we work with schools and with university platforms also. Please feel free for anybody to get in touch. Obviously, some of you, I'm sure, have our details. I know lots of on tonight that we would work with directly anyways. Thank you all for joining. If anybody's unsure of any topics or any content or any questions, feel free to liaise with us afterwards, obviously through any of our social media or on our website or through our email address. Really happy to take anybody's individualistic questions. Obviously, it's really important that any of the content today is a little bit generalised in some respects. So if a person, parent or teacher or a student even watching has more of a specific question, we're more than happy to address that in the best way that we can. We also have some free booklets, and now we'll interject at the end with some discounts that we have moving forward, so we can address those at a later stage. So just to give a brief overview of the actual course, and then we'll dive into a little bit more from the content side. It is split into 6 main module groups. Module 1, do's and don'ts and kind of top tips and definitions and booklets. Module 2 is more practical, very hands-on, classroom-based strategies, teacher strategies. What do we do at home and homework is taking way too long? What can we do in a school and a school setting that will help the student learn faster and retain the information for longer? Then our homework and our study strategies in module 3. Module 4, as you mentioned earlier, that well-being piece. So how do we integrate more of a balance between studying and school systems and homework, particularly catered towards maybe exam year students or students that have an awful lot of pressure intensive in an education system. And then our module 5 and module 6 have an overlap between very practical spelling, writing. We do a lot of typing in this session as well as to how to integrate that for a student, and a huge chunk of the course is on the assistive technology, as we are using today. So the assistive technology piece will vastly be growing and has grown exponentially in the last few years, which is great. But what assistive technology can be applied specifically for the student? So it's very ineffective to get lots of different ranges of assistive technology, them not being used, them not being applied on a daily basis. So we kind of break down a little bit of a formula as to what 2 or 3 packages will help a student now to get to, let's say, their next goal or their next level that they want to move forward. So a little bit of a content-wise, again, some of these we delve into a little bit more. So these will be looked at in a minor level on today's session, but obviously in the online course we address these topics in great level of detail. Some of our kind of top study spelling strategies. So we apply this for all age groups, young students, mid-range students, and our older students. They find usually most of this very, very useful. Often, obviously, we know hand in hand with dyslexia and learning differences, maybe a tendency towards difficulty with spelling. May not always be the case, but generally speaking, some students may have difficulty spelling certain words or using certain letters, or just a general kind of misspelling of spelling and grammar. Our first method is the bowl approach. Obviously, it says how it looks. So turning a word into more of a, let's say, aesthetically pleasing to look at. The one to the right, or maybe your left, of number 2, so the cat and the bottle. So you're double color coding here. This can be quite effective for students that find the blank page and the black and white quite mundane. Lots of students might do this as well on a typed format, which we find very effective. So they may actually obviously use a different font on a typed screen. And this would usually be the most beneficial in terms of highlighting the letter that the student maybe misspells or maybe incorrectly uses the most. So let's say if a student finds it very difficult, spelling words at A's or O's or I's or whatever their letters that they're constantly mixing up, common one, B's and D's, obviously trying to highlight that in a different colour may then obviously help them with relearning and respelling. The rainbow approach, we often use this. We find it at times a little bit distracting, so please bear that in mind, particularly for our younger students. They love using this because it takes them longer to write out the word, and they love colours and a mix of that, which can be very beneficial, but often can take a lot of time, obviously, for changing over a particular pen or keep changing letter in letter. So usually the rainbow approach works for very small and finite words. The stairs writing, actually, we find this to be probably one of the most effective methods for your longer based words. So kind of words 6, maybe 7 letters, and can be worked both ways. So it can be this way is obviously going down. It can be like a traditional stairs as well, obviously, is going up. And then in each stage, they add on a letter, which can be useful. The number 5 for the wrong hand. So obviously we won't do a lot of brain and neurosides today, but obviously we retain information differently in different sides of our brain and in different sides of our body, and we find that some students find this a little bit easier, that they can often use their wrong hand, or they can use the right hand, or they can integrate between the two. And that doesn't mean that they're ambidextrous or that they can write with the other hand. It's just that it's a kind of a memory trick, I suppose, really. If you want any further information on that, we're happy to look into that and send bits of that to you instead of us going into further detail on that today. The alphabetical order is usually the most effective in terms of, maybe weekly spelling tests. Over here, still in Ireland, there's still a traditional learning off your spellings for the end of the week approach. So this might be worked best in kind of a sequence pattern or a sequence process where students have to learn X amount of words by the end of the week and produce them in an exam environment. Rhyming, very, very useful and effective. Ideally, any element of rhythm, any element of musical quality can be really useful when learning things off, but it's really important to limit any external unnecessary words. So rhyme obviously is the best effective when they're trying to learn that particular piece of information. And then dictionaries. Look, online dictionaries or other versions of, let's say, more modern versions of dictionaries can be more useful than traditional book dictionaries. Traditional book dictionaries for people with learning differences can be very challenging. Obviously, if they can't spell the word, then they have difficulty trying to find it in a book. So we kind of come up with a very clever approach as to how a student can evolve using different versions of dictionaries. So key strategies then for writing. So we again look at this in great detail in the course, in the synopsis version here for you today. We're trying to get as much information in as possible, so apologies if we're moving at a fast pace, just trying to give you as much of an overview and tips and suggestions that will hopefully be applied in your everyday setting and everyday context. So planning. Planning is essential, right, for whatever age group there are, to write exam papers, to plan out answers, to understand content that needs to be written, that planning element. That ties in with our mind map approach. So we found through a lot of research that traditional conventional mind maps don't really work for students with learning differences. So we've devised through many, many years of work with institutions and organisations a kind of set approach to learning off information in a mind map fashion. It's very sequential, it doesn't have unnecessary detail that needs to be in a mind map, and is very useful then for students to retain it both in their short and their long-term memory. Kind of throwing up all information onto a mind map and just putting it in a circle generally isn't highly effective, especially longer term for students. The keeps going to say the box to the right, the grips. Okay, so don't work with these companies, so I'm not getting any additional kudos for any bits of this. We just find that this easy start range for all age groups has been very, very effective and very useful. So what it has is that it has a built-in grip function that doesn't and can't be taken on and off. So again, limits distraction and limits the need for extra fidgeting. It's quite easy to use, it's quite compact, and works for even smaller students and then older adults and teenagers as well. It has a very multi-diverse approach, and it takes away a lot of the strain in long-term writing. So for students that we have sitting exams that may need to produce 5 or 6 pages of paper when they haven't been granted, let's say, typing assistance or support, this can really ease the external pressure that they put on the page. Lots of students with learning differences might put a lot of pressure on the page, and the easiest way to check that is if a student has done writing, even for maybe 2 or 3 paragraphs on a page, can you turn over the page and see the indent? So not that you can make out the letters, but can you see a massive indent? Then generally the student's putting way too much pressure on the page, and that needs to be, rectified as quickly as possible so that they don't cause them unnecessary motor strain and actual physical strain in their arms and in their shoulders. Coloured pages and lined pages. So there's a lot of studies about, I suppose, the effective use of colour in a conventional kind of printed version format. We find that this is the most useful if it's lined. So let's say a normal refill pad or a normal notebook, but in a coloured version. Students that will use, coloured pages that may be used for art, but then are trying to make up their own lines and put random words everywhere, that usually creates a little bit of chaos and a lot of distraction. So we definitely recommend that colour pages, if they're used, should be lined pages also. Then that goes hand in hand, obviously, with coloured marking pens. Use sparingly. So we have a lot of students that we would teach to try and how do we pick out the most important words to highlight and more important words to learn and understand, or the most important words in an exam question. So it's really important that colours are used somewhat sparingly on a page, that there should be only 3 or 4 things that majorly stand out of a page. If there's loads of things going on or there's loads of different colours used, then nothing really is different or is really effective, and everything kind of blends into each other. Visual storyboards. So again, we look at this a little bit more in the course as to how to represent visual storyboards and how to plan out answers. Kind of similar to, I suppose, this bit of a slide layout. You have separate boxes, or they could be separate shapes, and everything's done in more of a visual, often a picture format, but doesn't always have to be with as limited words as possible. So helping a student retain the information so that they can produce it then in an exam or with homework. A general layout piece. So we'd be surprised the amount of students that we still go over this with regularly, particularly our older students, even at university level, that they often forget, the core basis of an exam or a homework question is an introduction, your main points and your conclusion. And that sequential format is essential from a marking basis and from, just a format basis in general. So trying to, I suppose, instruct and instrument those key parameters will be really important, and the earliest the student learns how to do this, the better. So we do this with some of our even maybe 8-9-year-old students, so that they can try and start understanding the concept of how they map out some bits of their homework and their answers. We're a firm believer in draft attempts. So I myself would have used many draft attempts in my own university years, rewriting, changing things around, getting things corrected where possible, and then rewriting things again. But draft attempts can be very useful for students to perfect maybe some element of an answer before then learning it off. So what we find in the last few years is that often students will do maybe one version of exam paper question, and then they will learn bits of it off, and then they will try and see, oh, well, sure, look, that's okay, now I've done that. Whereas ideally it being corrected, it being given feedback on, or reviewed, and then learning it off can obviously increase their marks and increase their mark basis. And then obviously if writing isn't the traditional approach, and students like myself, if they have dysgraphia or any, let's say, dexterity issues, then typing may be the best method. Again, we look at typing a little bit when we look at the assistive technology section and how best to integrate typing a little bit more into day-to-day existence. So just a little bit of recap. So Module 1 and Module 2, do's and don'ts, top tips for understanding an education psychologist assessment. So we find that when we work with many education psychologists, that often there's a little bit of an uncertainty for parents as to what half the words mean in a report. So we do a little bit of an overview as to how to break down a psychologist report and what are the key pieces of information in that. Some classroom-based strategies, as we mentioned. Learning styles is really essential to these few modules. So there's many different types of learning styles, and there's many different approaches that will suit types of students. And obviously, if a student learns best through visual or through sound, then them writing out all of their notes or trying to visualize all of their notes on a book isn't going to be the most best effective method for them. So we have 1 or 2 sample tests as well to try and determine what the student's learning style is, and again, they're all in the course. Booklets, and then obviously quizzes and our secret mind map hint and tip approach. So for my teacher strategy, I hope everybody's okay and you're all hanging in there. So for any of our teachers on board or listening back to any of the content, obviously play a vital role in a student's education. But often it's very difficult for a teacher to, illustrate a lot of different content in a classroom setting. We find that this works both ways, obviously, if a teacher is taking on the course, but also then if a parent wants to illustrate some of this information to the teacher. So we work with obviously many parents, and then they will say, oh, well, I kind of passed on 1 or 2 of these things to the teacher, and hopefully then they might be able to implement it. So it has multi-purpose uses. Our main piece is around the font. Now, this is quite subjective. So we find through our own work that particular types of font and particular sizes work for the students that we work with. Obviously, that kind of can vary from student to student, but the main rule of thumb here is as clear as possible. So any of the fonts that, look very lovely, might be on wedding invitations or any of those things, generally isn't the most effective approach for a student to retain and understand the information, and also doesn't really help with their spelling if they can't understand or see the word properly. Limiting white backgrounds, as we've mentioned already. Colour overlays. So we look at this a little bit more in the course as to how colour overlays can help, what's the science and what's the use behind them. Maybe some are familiar with colour overlays, and there's a link in between here, colour overlays and glasses. So Erlen lenses or Erlen lens syndrome, and then colour overlays. So we won't kind of touch on that a lot today because there's a lot of information in there, but that colour overlay piece can help a lot of students. Headings, subheadings, obviously, and bullet points. And for a teacher that can break down the information to a student in as easy as possible. Probably our main instruction, and the one that gets a lot of traction when we do school talks and university talks, is limiting the use and correction with red pens. Now, thankfully, since the pandemic, lots of corrections and feedback have been pushed online, so this isn't as a regular occurrence as much as what it used to be, but that red pen element is often very harsh and very much a trigger for lots of students, particularly actually older students when they had many years of looking at everything that's wrong. So that even using it another colour has been proven from a study basis to have more of an impact than using red. One instruction at a time goes without saying, but really, really vital for a student to understand what actually is going on and how they can move forward. The speaking slowly, not loudly, this gets a lot of traction at times because we've done some seminars with students of all various ranges of academic experience and knowledge, and some think, and some have some early stages, let's say, in their own development, that if they, say something louder, the student might understand it a little bit easily. And that's not really, unfortunately, true, unless they have hearing difficulties, which obviously is a completely different course and a completely different set of parameters. Generally speaking, trying to be as clear as possible in communication is the most effective approach for this. There is no, by any means, need to raise, voices in that sense where possible. Visual cues, I'll fight through the rest of these because just conscious that, there might be questions and I'll be talking for the whole session. Visual cues, movement breaks, and obviously ongoing feedback. So particularly for our university students or students that maybe around the 17, 18 mark, that ongoing feedback benefits them greatly because they know, okay, this is where I'm at and these are the things that I need to do differently. At a younger age, feedback obviously is vital, but illustrated in a different context, in a different way. So a little bit of an overview, module 3 and 4, homework methods. So how do we condense down homework? I'm very, very passionate about limiting as much homework as possible. I'm sure many of you saw probably over the recent months here in an island base, our president is hopefully trying to limit, maybe ban homework. Now when that will be in effect, no idea, but hopefully that limiting homework element will be vital for students' development and their overall education experience. But as it currently stands, in Ireland, we have a huge body of homework. So how do we help a student at home, or how do we help them in a classroom setting prepare to limit the time spent on homework? Studying, so we go through all studying methods, both for tests, for minor tests, no matter what age group the student is. Short and long-term memory strategies, vital for all of us. So how do you retain information on a short-term and a longer-term basis? Exam environments, nutrition, health and well-being, stress, and then balance. So obviously a bit more of a well-being slant there to those modules. How do we integrate that piece a little bit more in day-to-day, and what does that look like? Building confidence and resilience. So this is very much vital when we work with the students that we've worked with and when we work with the organisations that we've worked with in the past. Unfortunately, over time, with a student that has possibly a different way of learning, no matter what age they're at, they may have been through some element at least of the education system by the time we've seen them. And that constant element of going in often overwhelmed, anxious, getting things wrong and trying to constantly stay up to date with other students can very much radically erode away a student's confidence, often quite quickly, and they might not even know it. So trying to maintain or trying to rebuild a student's confidence is core really to their underlying existence, unfortunately anyway, but core to their self-belief about their educational path. Thankfully, when we've seen students even at an older age group, so maybe later teenagers or even going into university, and they've had many, many years in a system that they haven't really received additional help from, there's a huge body of work then that needs to be done with not only the education piece of all their modules or all of their content that they need to learn, but their self-belief and willingness to try and understand it. So the longer that this goes on, obviously the more and more work that needs to be done to try and rebuild. Very, very doable, of all age groups and age parameters. It's just more of how quickly we can get to that and how we can grow from that too. So we address growth mindset, discussing obviously resilience, celebrating achievements. So we do a lot in the course about celebrating the little wins. Sometimes this is day-to-day activity. This is as basic as the basic. And we find that often with students with learning differences, particularly myself and other students that we would work with, have a little bit of a perfectionistic element. So it's usually not celebrated until everything is finished, or the full academic term is done, or all the exams are done, or all the results are gotten. But it's all of those incremental steps that get to that stage. So we try and implement a little bit more of a healthy parameter of, okay, well, we finished this chapter and this has taken months. How can we create a little bit of a, reward element with that, so that it's not this finite, working towards goal that is often a little bit too far in the distance. Positive feedback, compliments. So often, obviously, complimenting others can give us our own sense of fulfillment. Independence, limiting social media. I won't get into all of these today, but there are a lot on the course as to how do we help a student maybe in the teenage years limit their involvement in this that's distracting them maybe from their studies. And then treat yourself like you treat a friend. So you try and work with students as to how they can, illustrate and communicate with others as they would communicate then with themselves, and vice versa. So a little bit of an overview, Module 5 and Module 6. So as we mentioned, we did a little bit today on the spelling methods. We would look at that in great detail as to how to help with spelling, writing, the assistive technology. So we mentioned at the start of the session, applications, what would be useful, hardware, software, what will suit the age range of a student, and how that can, drastically change their experience, really. So obviously this technology is vastly, as we were mentioning, growing and evolving, and and can be a very useful tool to lots of people. There's no doubt about that it can have a huge, tremendous effect, both in the ongoing learning and in the exam environment. But it's really useful and important to get the right pieces of technology and not just take everything on board. We do a little bit on the application piece, and then obviously useful tools for everyday settings. Now we do have a little bit of a quiz. Well, it's basically a very, very short quiz. There's one question on our Instagram and our Facebook page. Now, unfortunately, because I can't hear or see any of you, I'll trust that anybody might look at it. If they can, if people can log on and do it now. Our pages are obviously at Blossom for Life, either on Instagram or on Facebook. What we tend to do is we do a little bit of an interactive session when I do some of these, but we're in different platform today for my learning. So definitely, if people have any questions about some of the topics in that, feel free, or if you get a chance to check out some of our content on social media and some of our quiz questions, and you're unsure of them, feel free to get onto us. I find we're nearly there. Hang in there with me. I find that this image really sums up an awful lot of very useful content for all age groups and all age parameters. This doesn't even have to be on an educational based setting. This just can be a day-to-day thing. As I mentioned, we're very proactive in the self-care and the well-being piece. Because obviously there is a high chance of a student with a learning difference having borderline or any form of mental health difficulties. And this kind of pictures things, I suppose, in a very inviting way, and an easy format to read and understand. So if it's from songs to art to, going out in nature to anything at all, and each person should be able to develop a little bit of awareness as to what would work for them. Not all of these things will help everybody, but it's really important to try and find out what suits you or what suits the student. And we do this with lots of our younger students actually, and they love doing any of these things because obviously it's a break for them looking at the books, but they take to this very quickly. And as we get a little bit older, we kind of come out of some of these things through society, and we have so much else to do. So it's important. It's important at times for us to go back to basics a little. So this is our full overview of the course, as we mentioned. We have our 6 modules, and we do have an awful lot of additional bonus material that we didn't address today, but we have a range of fabulous talks and speaker series from education psychologists, occupational therapists, and doctors, nutritionists, where I do seminars with them, and they give kind of very concrete and day-to-day useful tips and suggestions as to how to help, a student or a family at home or in a school setting. We have a limited offer, which Aaron will talk about at the end of today's session. So if anybody's interested in purchasing the course or finding out more, you can either access it through my website or you can access it through Aaron's website, and he'll go through that at the end. And as I mentioned, we have a free booklet. Now, because I can't get in to send this to you, if people would like access to some of our pre-booklets, it contains kind of a synopsis of what we looked at today, but practical tips and suggestions, please feel free to email me after the workshop, and I'm more than happy to send you any additional resources. I like leaving things at a quote, so I always love to wrap things up with something a little bit different. And this, I suppose, try to be a rainbow in somebody else's cloud. It's really important to recognise that, if this person has a learning difference, they don't have a learning difference, whatever is going on in somebody's different life path at the moment. We all have our own things, whether it's a mix between good and bad, or, if they're going through difficult transitions. And it's really important to recognise that we may not always be aware of what everybody else is going through, but, how we communicate and how we speak to them is very, very important. Students and younger kids, and they may hold things in quite a lot. They may do the opposite too, but they may mask things greatly. And it's really important that we often take a second or two as educators or as parents or as, friends or teachers or whatever capacity we're in, to try and see a little bit of the bigger picture, both for ourselves and for others that we are dealing with. So thank you all for listening. I hope some bits of that was useful and practical for you all. I hope that, some bits you can apply, even as quickly as, this evening or in the next few days. What one or two things can you implement that might make a little bit of a difference? So if you're a teacher, or if you're a parent, or if you're a student, even yourself watching, what one or two things that can just make that little step forward? It doesn't have to be a big move. You don't by any means have to take all of them on, but what little thing can hopefully alleviate some bits of strain or some bits of endless, tiring work, and that can, make your day a little bit better. So thank you all for listening. As I mentioned, if anybody has any questions or content and they'd like me to look at, or anything at all, I'm more than happy to answer those for you.